In an ancient castle, in the middle of a richly furnished hall, right under a carved golden chandelier, which dimly lit everything with a small number of lit candles, there stood an iron cage. The young girl Arya ate, slept, was awake, and spent every minute of her life in it. Her beautiful, long, flowing curls had a delicate pink tint. Her eyes were a little brighter, her skin was ivory in color, and her lips stood out like a scarlet cloud on the maiden's beautiful face. All the girl could do was live every day, following the orders of her master and performing wondrous melodies for him and his guests. And now the gathered crowd echoed the master's voice and asked the young siren to perform her song and save everyone with it. Arya did not dare to keep anyone waiting. She obediently opened her lips and allowed the melody to flow into the world around her. The girl was a siren, a monster whose song bewitched a person, the last in her world. She was a bird that was locked in the emperor's cage and forced to sing until her death, to the joy of everyone. And this hour was already very close, because the crowd did not care about the condition of their songbird. No one gave the girl even a minute of rest. Every day it became more and more difficult for the poor thing to breathe. Her lungs ached violently in her chest. The girl tiredly opened her eyes and looked at her dress, stained with old dried blood, on which more and more fresh streaks appeared. She grabbed the hem with force and leaned her hands on the floor, trying to give her back a break from sitting in one position for a long time. The girl cried and mentally asked, begged at least someone to come and save her, no matter whether it was an angel or the demon himself. At the estate, the young master scolded his servants for the fact that they could adequately perform their work and did not take into account his wishes. Arya told us that today she married the young archduke under a contract. She and this young man would be married for the next 10 years, which would help them both protect each other. These two were still too young for such an event in their lives as marriage, but there were good reasons and circumstances that forced the heroes to do so. The young master was at that moment dissatisfied with the fact that he was forced to share a room with his too young wife, refusing to provide the heroes with separate apartments. The guy understood that both of them were still too young to spend their first wedding night immediately after the conclusion of the union. Therefore, he tiredly covered his eyes with his hand, unable to achieve what he wanted, then rubbed the back of his head and went to deal with his new bride. He was Lloyd Cardenas Valentine, a demon archduke who sold his soul to the devil, who killed all his relatives and subordinates at the age of 18. In a past life, this Lloyd Valentine was a traitor who killed the emperor himself. But the most important thing is that this very demon was an indispensable savior for our songbird Arya. In the past, the emperor often shouted at a girl for completely different reasons, be it a wrong song, a look, or something else. At the slightest mistake, the man immediately and constantly drew his imperial sharpened sword. He grabbed the poor emaciated girl by the hair, pulled her to the edge of the cage, and put a weapon to her head, threatening her with violence. So their days passed, lasting seemingly forever, until one day a young man with a bloody sword in his hands appeared on the threshold of the hall. Archduke Valentine swung his weapon and attacked the unguarded emperor, killing him in his own home. Then he pulled the weapon out of the body of the already dead man, brushed away drops of blood from it, stepped over the dead man, and headed towards the cage that stood in the middle of the hall. In it, the young, fragile siren Arya was sitting on the floor, trembling with fear of the unknown after the murder of her master. However, instead of the same sudden death, the girl was saved because the young man opened the bolt and released the bird to freedom. This was Arya's memory of salvation, which the girl could not forget even after her death. She forever imprinted in her memory the moment when, after a short thought, she extended her fragile hand to her savior. However, at that same second, her whole body contracted from a new attack of unbearable pain that pierced it. The girl looked over her back at her wounded leg, bleeding through bandages wrapped by someone, and then told her savior that she was no longer able to fly. Only after this did the Archduke notice her wound and realize that this bird had already had its wings broken off. He had come too late. The hero picked up the weakened girl in his arms and moved with her towards the exit from this place, which was becoming more and more saturated with the smell of death every minute. Lloyd Valentine claimed that he had heard before that the siren's song could drive a person crazy, but assured that this fate would definitely not affect him. After all, it is impossible to cloud the mind of someone who was crazy from the very beginning. The young man easily carried the girl along the corridors of the castle, carrying her in his arms and carefully making sure that nothing touched the poor girl's legs along the way. Arya wearily leaned against the chest of her savior. Tears rolled down her tired face. The girl allowed herself to close her eyes and try to relax. It was at that moment that the image of her opened cage and a snow-white bird that flew from its prison into the heights came into her head. Then the girl thought that if there was another life, then in it she would try to save her demon in gratitude for this one. Someone was constantly calling Arya, so she slowly, as if after a long sleep, opened her beautiful eyes. It was her young husband who was worried because the girl had been in prostration for a long time and did not respond. The still very young girl looked straight into the face of her new husband, then smiled sincerely. She suddenly jerked, leaned forward a little, and suddenly grabbed the boy by the hand, thereby surprising him. Arya smiled radiantly, then thanked the Archduke for his birth and had lunch to make him the happiest person in the world. A beautiful adult stately woman in a beautiful green dress sits in a barely lit room and calls on someone to remain silent all the time. It was our Arya's mother, who gave her a special mixture when she was a child so that the baby could not talk. The girl's father considered her useless because of this and beat her all the time in a rage, forcing her to listen to his abuse. And her mother never sang lullabies to her daughter or told her fairy tales. And in the spring of the girl's 10th year of life, she was found with her vocal cords completely cut. The maids whispered behind their masters' backs that mother had supposedly committed suicide. Arya accidentally heard about it one day and found out about everything. She was a siren, something bearing the name of an ancient monster, an ability that flowed through her mother's veins and was passed down through generations. 12 years ago, Count Cortez stole a siren and introduced her to the world. She was the girl's mother, Sophia. However, after her death, anger fell on the little girl with even greater force. The beating continued until she accidentally screamed in pain one day, making a sound that was no longer blocked by the mixture. The Count was very happy about this turn, because now the deception of his old siren was revealed and he could use the new one for his own purposes. After this, Arya took over the life of a siren instead of her mother and sang songs at secret parties of the secular society of aristocrats and the imperial family. The girl saw what she should not have seen, heard what she should not have heard. The girl prayed to God for salvation, but instead became even more famous because of her talent. And one day, a rumor began to spread that the siren was not an angel of salvation who had borrowed the voice of God, but a monster. The saint rebelled and promised the people to cleanse the imperial palace and grant God's mercy so that there would be no more innocent victims. The war began. Conscripts were chosen regardless of gender and age, and if they resisted, they were fired by force, and the family was exterminated. Countless people died. The Holy Knights caused a terrible massacre. They demanded that the siren monster be executed, but the emperor had Arya sing for him all her life. Therefore, he broke the girl's legs, locked her in a cage, and closed her mouth, leaving the girl to continue to live like this. As a result, when the girl was already desperate and wanted only death, Archduke Valentine appeared in front of her. The Archduke Demo, who killed all his relatives and subordinates at the age of 18, was now whispering to Arya. He realized that the girl was calling the demon to get rid of her torment, so he advised her to take revenge. Arya had her doubts at first, but the young man's words convinced her, and the girl began her song of revenge. And now, carrying a siren in his arms, the young man regretted that he had not come earlier and could only hear one song. After such words, Arya, for the first time in her life, wanted to sing to someone of her own free will and asked the guy to listen to her. Her voice came out badly and it sounded more like the girl was simply moving her lips. But it was a true siren song, dedicated to the demon who dragged her to hell, her savior. But the moment the girl took her last breath, she suddenly smelled flowers. The ceiling of the attic in which she was locked until the year she turned 10 appeared before her eyes. Arya raised her hands to her face, felt it, and realized that the old wounds no longer hurt. The iron bars disappeared. It was not a dream, and outside the window with wooden shutters it was spring. The girl extended her hand forward, exposing it to the wind, because she returned to life after death. She could speak and no longer drank the mixture, which means she ended up in the period after her mother's death. The girl looked around and tried to recall long-forgotten moments in her memory. The thought came to her mind about her father, Count Cortez, who was the culprit of the destruction of her life, and now she could take revenge on him. The girl carefully gathered herself and went outside her room, which had served as her dungeon before. The servants were frightened by such sudden changes in the behavior of the young mistress. Arya went straight to the kitchen, hoping to find her father there, and she was right. The man was sitting at the table with a bottle in his hands, not at all hoping or expecting to see the baby there. Meanwhile, the girl, as soon as she saw her father, immediately opened her mouth and started singing siren songs. And at that very moment, a forest aroma seemed to spread around them in the kitchen, as if fairies had appeared. The man looked around, trying to understand whether all this was happening in reality or a dream. As soon as Arya finished her song, her father immediately rose to his feet, unable to believe what had happened. The man grabbed his head and could not believe that the invariably stupid cripple, who could not even speak, was still hiding such talent. The man immediately realized that his daughter was a siren and much stronger than her mother. He immediately began making plans to take over the empire thanks to this song and his daughter. He fell on his knees in front of the girl, begging her to sing him this wonderful melody again and again. However, Arya told him that tonight was the first and last night he would be able to hear her song. The man immediately realized that the girl was performing a melody that made people forget about everything after listening to it. And now, as soon as Arya opened her mouth and began to sing the first chords, the man's mind immediately became clouded. When it was all finally over, the Count tiredly lowered his head, and the weariness of the whole world fell upon him. Arya took advantage of this and found out from her father where he kept the mermaid's tears, after which, having got her hands on the key to the cache, the girl immediately went to its storage location. She went into her father's bedroom. Then she walked around the back of the bed, bent down and climbed under the hem. There she saw a beautiful wooden carved box, opened it with a key and pulled it up. There, on a small red velvet pillow, Arya saw 2 shining tears of a mermaid. They harbored hostility towards the sirens and brought back the full effect of the sung song, which is why the girl could never resist her father. The man did not part with the mermaid's tears even for a moment. The girl recalled all the events that happened at that time in her past life and was glad that she returned at that very moment. Having finished her business, she left her father's bedroom, then went to the window and looked at the moon. She was very glad that she found herself in the spring of her decade, because it was at this moment that she could change her future. She still couldn't quite believe that in the future she wouldn't have burn marks that completely covered one side of her face, and her legs wouldn't be broken. The girl walked in her room from corner to corner and thought about what she should do next, because of the mixture that she had been drinking since birth, her life had been greatly shortened. There, Arya immediately realized that she couldn't tell anyone the fact that she was the last surviving siren, whose songs drove people crazy. At that moment, a young man with gray eyes but a lifeless look in them came into her head. The girl remembered all the events that were supposed to happen in the near future, which in the future would lead to the destruction of the entire Valentine family. In 4 years, all blood relatives, subordinates, and servants of the clan will be killed. And the only survivor of that incident will be Lloyd Valentine. Of course, after such events, they will point to him as a criminal. Arya recalled that although he did not suffer any punishment, this incident could be true. The girl also recalled that at their last meeting, the man did not express any desires. He was simply completely empty. Arya opened the window wider, then walked to the windowsill and carefully sat down on the edge. The girl looked at the stars and thought that an unwilling man saved her in a past life, so she wants to thank him in this one. She looked at the moon and promised herself that in this life, she would use her time to be grateful. Around the same time, in another palace, a young boy stood near the window and looked at the same moon. Suddenly, his peace was disturbed by a servant who burst into the room and reported that his mother was dying. The young master turned around at the shout, looked at the man with a blank look, and promised to come soon. In Arya's house, there was a commotion among the maids, who were surprised by the strange requests of their master. The man ordered the child to be washed and decorated, which he had never required before, so everyone was discouraged. At that time, the girl was sitting on the bed in her tattered dress and listening to all the conversations that were taking place in her presence. She listened calmly to the accusations and did not show that she understood or reacted to them. At that moment, she only thought that their entire family was famous for its beauty as sirens. Of course, all the maids in their house were amazed by the appearance of both the daughter and the mother at one time. They were perceived only as beautiful dolls, with eyes like real precious stones. Another maid rushed into the room, saying that the master had just sent people to the capital in search of a decent dress for the young lady. The other maids did not immediately understand her surprise because they had been discussing this since the morning. However, the girl was confused by the fact that the lady was ordered to be sent to the Duchy of Valentine. All the remaining maids were shocked that she was being sent there as the bride of the young Archduke. The girls did not understand such a strange turn of events, but they thought that once there, the young lady would die. Most likely, the child will be offered as a sacrifice to the demon before it has time to harm everyone. The Archduchy opened its fortress gates only when I was looking for a partner for marriage with the future head. But in reality, it was a place where people go to give birth to an heir, then get sick for a long time and die, as was the case with all previous brides. Because the young girl had to cut off all ties with her family and acquaintances, the maids were glad that she would not be able to talk about how she was abused at home. Young Arya at that moment was thinking whether she should do the same with these intolerable girls as she did with her father. But instead, the girl finally decided to show her character and ordered to bring her normal food, throwing the bowl on the floor. Only now, taking advantage of the maid's fear, did she finally begin to look like a young lady. The girl used her power without giving the maids a chance to correct their previous misdeeds. At that moment, young Arya remembered the expressions on the faces that she saw while sitting in the cage. This was the expression the aristocrats made when looking at her when the mask hiding the scar accidentally fell off. The girl decided that in this life it was better for her to cover herself for safety. A few days later, the family carriage was heading through the forest towards the groom's house. The Count was furious that the road was too long, so he ordered the carriage to stop. The coachman at first did not want to do this, but he could not resist the orders of his master. The father was furious that he was not given the respect he deserved by the Valentine family. He had sent them letters before, but not even one short reply had been received. The coachman was scared because he had to drive through the forest without knowing his final destination. No one in the Empire knew the way to Castle Valentine because no one returned alive. However, the Count was furious at this statement and threatened such an irresponsible coachman with death, after which he got out of the carriage and pressed his weapon on the man. Arya remained in the carriage all this time and waited for the further outcome of events. Suddenly, the girl felt something strange in the air, as if there was a magical barrier here. The source of the siren's ability is the power of spirits, although the sources of power differed among different creatures, but their basic properties were similar. Therefore, once on one level, one could easily feel the energy of the other side. Suddenly, something strange began to blow through the air. The atmosphere around changed. Moreover, even the Count and those accompanying their services noticed this. They immediately remembered the rumors that there were monsters in this area. Suddenly, a tearing scream came from the rain, which made even Arya flinch. The girl realized that something had happened, so she reached into her bag for a mask. She needed to go out and see what was happening there. She needed a disguise. Stepping outside the carriage, the girl immediately saw dead men. A stranger stood right in front of her, surrounded by 3 giant wolves. This man ordered his pets to kill trespassers in their forest. The wolves were already rushing in a rage towards the young girl. However, at the last moment, right in front of her, they stopped dead in their tracks and began sniffing her, after which they changed their anger to mercy and began to lick Arya. The girl was glad that she survived, although she did not understand why. The owner of the animals hit them on the forehead, thinking that something was wrong with them. However, they only began to whine resentfully and hid behind the girl. The owner thought that this was real madness. This had never happened before. His hunting dogs instinctively react to the powerful force and obey him, because there is no man in the world who could keep up with his power. The man squatted in front of Arya and tried to look at her from all sides. However, the ability to contact animals was one of the siren's characteristic abilities. The dog seemed very cute, so she reached out and pet him. The girl was pleasantly surprised because her father used to kill all the animals, preventing them from getting closer to her. And their master clearly did not like this behavior of his subordinates. They reacted too friendly to the unfamiliar girl, so the man took her to the palace. The butler was already there and explained that the Count was the first who stubbornly entered the castle. At the same time, the gallant man handed Arya a huge mug with some kind of warm drink. A strange white thing floated on top of it, which the girl poked with her finger. This behavior surprised the butler a little and embarrassed the girl herself. The man leaned towards her ear and whispered some new word. Arya looked at him, trying to understand what this could mean. The owner of the dog stood silently at that time, leaning his back against the wall. Then he ordered the butler to bring food to his hounds before the mountain animals devoured everything. The Count was amazed that his family's personal knight and mercenaries would become dog food. He wanted to yell at his daughter again, but the animals got angry and did not allow him to do this. The butler reminded him that he was saved from the same fate only thanks to the young lady. They also promised to reimburse all expenses incurred by the Count. Moreover, the owner of these strange animals said that the amount could be any. This clearly calmed and pleased the man a little, so he remembered his original plans. He talked about how he brought his daughter here to introduce her to the Valentine family. He began to describe the girl's skills and abilities as if he were presenting a product on the market. However, he was quickly reminded that he had come uninvited, caused a stir, and insulted the family. The Count clearly did not agree with these accusations and even hit the table with his hand in a rage. However, the Duke said that they would turn a blind eye to this incident only because of the greatness of his late father. Arya thought to herself that they had hit the Count where it hurt most. The servant promised the girl to bring a more comfortable mask so that she could drink cocoa in peace. Arya was amazed that in this house they treated her very kindly. Even huge dogs came up to her and purred sweetly in her presence. Even the butler was amazed that the wolf began to bark like a dog. Arya thought that people were also so friendly to her because of her siren powers. Therefore, the girl wrote on a piece of paper that she could tame all animals. Unknown to her father, she also asked to be taken away from her family. Immediately after this, the girl tore her message into small pieces. The Count, in a rage, demanded that this sheet be returned to him and stand still from now on. He tried to grab Arya's hand, causing everyone else to become enraged, and Archduke Valentine himself agreed to the purchase of this young girl. The heroine admitted that the atmosphere of the young master was similar to the atmosphere of Lloyd from her memories. The Duke was surprised that the young lady was looking at him so closely for so long. The Duke was amazed by this strange little girl who was not at all afraid of him. She heard the threats coming from this man, but decided to trust him. The gentleman stood a little longer, looked at the girl, and still decided to buy her. He ordered his butler to issue payment for the contract immediately. The servant was amazed that everything was decided so quickly, but supported her master's decision. He admitted that he also liked this young lady. The servant brought 2 fairly large wooden chests filled to the brim with gold. They were placed on the table right in front of the Count, who could not believe his eyes. In exchange for this gold, the Duke ordered the Count to forget about the existence of this child from today. If the promise is broken, then the entire family of the Count will be cut out from the history of the Empire. However, the unlucky father said that in addition to this, he had one more condition. The Duke was amazed at such impudence, but decided to listen to him one last time. And the Count asked that if a daughter was born, then let her be given to him, because the girl would not be able to inherit the title in any case. He came up with this condition because if the siren's daughter gives birth to a child, he may also turn out to be a siren. Arya was amazed that even when he was brainwashed, he still came up with such decisions. The Duke listened to all this, but was clearly not delighted with such arrogant demands. He also threatened the Count that he could go to feed the dogs at any moment. From behind, the butler approached Arya's father and put his hand on his shoulder, intending to take him to another room. He said that the Count could have been released amicably if he had told me his last words. He then snapped his fingers, urging the guards to remove the man from the premises. The Count screamed and resisted to the last, forcing his daughter to look at this pathetic behavior. The butler turned to the girl and smiled, as if none of this was happening now. He escorted her to a separate, beautiful, bright, spacious room where a small table had already been set for tea. The girl was offered to stay in this place until her personal room was prepared. Also called to her was Dana, who was the main maid here, as well as the nanny of the young Archduke. The woman seemed very nice, and she really liked her too. The maid said that unfortunately they would not be able to see the young master for the time being, because he is now somewhere caring for his madam mother, who was sick. Arya was a little upset, but she understood that few would be happy with an unwanted bride. Meanwhile, the maid began to study the interests of the young mistress. The girl needed to divide the food into those that she likes and those that she does not like. However, Arya hung at a loss because she didn't have a favorite food, and she didn't particularly know the species. The maid was confused by such a laconic answer from the young lady, after which the girl added a few more basic things that she remembered from her past life. There, she also wrote some strange name which the maid could not recognize. But the butler, who had been standing nearby all this time, began to quietly shake with laughter. In fact, Arya simply did not know the correct name of that white and plump thing that she recently drank. However, even from such a meager description, she guessed what it was about and with a smile promised to bring it later. Arya further wrote that she is not particularly knowledgeable about food names. After which tears appeared in the maid's eyes, she leaned over to the little girl and hugged her. The woman realized that it must have been very difficult for the girl all this time. She gently hugged the young mistress and promised that now everything would be fine as long as she was in this house. Arya smelled an unfamiliar scent from the head maid of the demon castle, which made her relax. Later, the young lady was already changed into clean, dry clothes and stood near the window, looking at the rain. She looked back and saw her maid, who had come to check if she was okay. The woman thought that a little girl like Arya was very scared one night, to which the girl replied that she was not a child, just short. This remark brought a sweet smile to the face of the head maid and cheered her up. The woman gently put her hand on the girl's head and stroked her, calling her baby. Arya was not used to this kind of treatment and tried to smooth her hair after it had been ruffled. She was a little embarrassed, but was immediately pleased that the warmth of her hand still remained on her hair. She immediately thought that this was probably why dogs loved it so much when someone stroked them on the head. Seeing such a sweet reaction, she offered to stroke her there and then if she liked it so much. The woman was in a great mood and asked why the young lady was looking out the window so intently. The girl told her that the flowers were simply very beautiful, and from this room they could be clearly seen. The maid answered her that many rare plants were planted in this castle. Arya asked to show her these rare plants because she was very interested. The maid's heart beat faster from such a pleading look. Before going out, it was necessary to change into different clothes, so I had to choose an outfit. All these dresses were delivered from the old house, so the maid asked her beloved to throw them away, to which Arya replied that she never wore them. Her father bought the clothes shortly before arriving here. Dana was furious at how poorly the young mistress was treated in their home, after which the maid said that in fact all these dresses look like garbage. The fabrics and design were of very poor quality. Such things should never be accepted in this house. So the woman turned around and ordered another maid to call the maids to take her measurements. Dana clapped her hands loudly several times, attracting the attention of all the girls gathered. She ordered to sort dresses, accessories, and lace umbrellas that fit in an hour. 2 younger maids grabbed Arya by the arms and began measuring her with tape from all sides. And the young lady looked at everything that was happening and could not fully believe it. They dressed her up in a beautiful dress and pulled a warm raincoat over her. They put shoes on their feet in the form of enamel rubber boots. Her hair was gently combed and tied with a beautiful ribbon to match her outfit. In such treatment, young Miss Arya was certainly more beautiful than ever before. She was even given a small umbrella that matched the overall look of the outfit. The head maid was pleased with her work and the work of the other girls. But that was not all, because she had a small gift for the young mistress. The mask Arya was wearing now seemed uncomfortable to her, so the woman made her a new one. Arya really liked the bunny mask, but she found it a little childish. The girl was very pleased with such a kind attitude towards her from the others. She was also struck by the fact that even the Archduke himself did not check her face. Suddenly, the head maid gently touched Arya's cheeks, which embarrassed her. The woman brought the girl a large mug of hot cocoa so that she could warm up. It was very unusual to receive such sweet and kind treatment towards yourself. She really liked the drink, because before the girl thought that she had no appetite, since she vomited from any food. However, it turned out that the problem was precisely in the food itself, which she was given from the count. The head maid was very happy that the young mistress liked the cocoa so much. She thought Arya was a very sweet girl, which embarrassed her greatly. After all, she is used to being always shouted at, beaten, mocked, but not admired in any way. The door swung open with force. The maid loudly called to the head maid to report that there was a problem. And outside the window, it was still pouring rain. The drops fell beautifully into the pond. Somehow it happened that Arya went out for a walk all alone. The girl looked at the top floor of the main palace, because that's where the Archduke's wife is located. Just recently, a maid ran in to pick up the maid and told them that her mother's condition had suddenly deteriorated greatly. Therefore, Dana was forced to leave her alone for a while and visit the young master. He is caring for his sick mother. He must love her deeply, more than anyone. That is why he could not accept her death in his past life, so every day he was tormented by a feeling of loss. Arya thought that his mother should not die, because this could lead to dire consequences. Perhaps if she dies, then Lloyd will repeat his past ruthless life again. Therefore, Arya thought that she should help him somehow, but she could not understand how exactly. Near the pond, she heard someone's steps, and a second later a sword was presented to her neck. It was a young gentleman who assumed that the girl was up to something and began to act, taking advantage of the moment of general fuss. Arya got scared and tried to take a step back, away from the sharp weapon. She remembered that the young master had empty eyes before. However, in this life, he still knew how to make such a strange look. The girl at that moment realized that he was not crazy from the very beginning. Meanwhile, the young master tried to find out from the girl what she forgot here. He stepped on her step by step as the girl stepped back, not allowing her to leave. At one point, his sword even inflicted a small wound on the young lady's neck with its sharp end. Arya immediately realized that she was a little injured, so she flinched. The young duke stood silently and waited until the girl began to make excuses somehow. However, he realized that the rumors were not lies. She really could not speak, so he laid down his arms. Arya realized that Lloyd doubted everything so much that he even questioned her very existence. The girl threw her umbrella aside to give the duke a better look at her. The rain immediately began to fall on her clothes and hair, causing Arya to begin to tremble. The young archduke saw the girl's mask and nicknamed her Rabbit because of it. He ordered her to speak with her lips if she wanted to reveal her intentions, and he would read them. However, she could not tell him everything she wanted to tell him so badly. So Lloyd took our little girl by the hand and led her to a drier, safer place. He was amazed that this little girl was very fragile. He recalled that even his mother was not so weak when she first arrived to them. He then noticed the cut on Arya's neck that he himself had recently left behind. He looked at him carefully and even thought for a few minutes, standing motionless. Then he took a handkerchief from his pocket and ordered the girl to turn her back to him. The young archduke came closer and carefully wrapped the scarf around the girl's neck. He carefully, not very tightly but not too weakly, pulled the scarf and tied it in a knot. After that, he leaned down to her ear and addressed her by her new nickname. He was wondering if this girl was fodder for the little birds. This word means the master of the ditch or the underworld, so he was asking if she was a henchman of criminals. Arya remembered that the Valentine family had enemies everywhere, including in the ditch. This assumption was due to the fact that such servants are usually denied the opportunity to speak. The young master said that there is one way to test it, so you need to follow him. However, the girl was clearly not eager to carry out his order. This only further increased the young master's doubts. He was about to reach for the weapon, but Dana's hand prevented him from doing so. She grumbled something that clearly convinced the young master to leave her alone. He still thought for a few moments, deciding what to do with her next, after which he pulled out his hand and decided to leave this matter for consideration by the head. He also gave advice that if the girl wants to survive, then it is better for her to leave here on her own. Their family is clearly no place for such a powerless and weak child. After that, Arya returned back to the building where she heard the maids talking. The girls whispered that the young master's mother was in critical condition. They also assumed that perhaps many would die today due to the sad news. And although everything worked out well before, today the topic of wills was touched upon for the first time. Since this topic was raised, it means the lady feels that she doesn't have much time left. Arya overheard that Mother would like to be buried under the cherry tree, but because of the rain it cannot bloom. The lady was very annoyed that the rainy season started in the spring. Arya remembered that she seemed to have seen a cherry tree while walking in the garden recently. She also remembered that the head maid had definitely said that there were flowers to look at in the garden. But outside the window the rain continued to pour, not even intending to stop. Arya went out into the garden and approached the very cherry tree that the maids were talking about. It was a huge old tree, without a single leaf or flower on it. Arya looked up at him and suddenly a wonderful idea came to her mind. The girl came as close to the tree as possible and touched it with her hands. Arya realized that now she would be singing outside the house for the first time in her life, after which she opened her mouth and began to sing a gentle and drawn-out melody of the Song of Life. This siren song was meant to breathe life into whatever it was aimed at. Such a beautiful melody even made Arya smile at how pleasant it was to perform it without hiding. Literally after a while, the rain stopped pouring, and before that, the completely black cherry tree was covered with beautiful, delicate flowers. The girl stood right under the crown and looked, trying to see as much as possible. Pain pierced her body. It could not hold out as long as she thought. A carrier pigeon landed on the girl's hand, so she decided to use it and send a message. She leaned over and began to whisper something gently in his ear. Later, she waved her hands and sent the dove flying to its recipient. Arya stood under the cherry blossom tree and watched the bird fly away into the distance. Suddenly, the strength completely left her. The girl began to fall back. She fell unconscious to the ground, her hair scattered across the grass carpet. Meanwhile, the carrier pigeon flew to one of the windows in the palace. With his knocking, he frightened the young maids who were in the room at that time. They looked back to see what strange sounds were coming from the balcony. There the girls saw this snow-white bird knocking on the window. They thought the bird was crazy and tried to drive it away. However, with their conversations, they attracted the attention of the sick lady, and she wanted to look at this brave bird that was knocking on the window. She ordered her maids to hold her hands and lead her to the window. The girls carefully helped the lady get up, grabbed her by the elbows, helping her walk. However, when approaching the balcony, Mrs. Mother saw something completely different first of all. Something happened that could not happen in such terrible weather. The eldest lady looked at her beloved garden and could not believe her eyes. She even reached out and tried to grab a few petals that the wind carried. A woman stood on her balcony looking at a beautiful cherry orchard that suddenly blossomed. At this time, there was absolute silence in another room of the castle. There was a creak, the door was pulled and opened, and someone entered the room. This someone turned out to be the young master of the Valentine family. He walked over to the bed and looked at the girl who was lying unconscious on it. The young master reached out his hand to the girl's face, intending to remove her mask. At that moment, events that happened just recently came to his mind. Along the corridor of his palace, the boy heard the maids whispering among themselves. They talked about the disappearance of the young bride, and the Duke admitted that he had seen her last. He also admitted that he had threatened her and even ordered her to disappear from this estate. The looks from the maids made him think that he had not done the best thing. Therefore, the young master personally went in search of his bride. That is why he went out into the garden and was surprised that the completely dried cherry trees had blossomed. The guy held falling flower petals in his hands, trying to comprehend. At some point, he even pinched his cheek, trying to check if it was a dream. The boy was amazed at how beautiful the cherry tree was. He went on and on playing with the flower petals. Suddenly, his feet tripped over some obstacle while he was walking through the garden. The boy looked down to see what it was. On the ground, he saw the missing girl's bag and opened it. He wondered what she was wearing in her. Maybe there was poison in there. But instead, he found only her strange notes with which she communicated with people. Most of them were cute enough, but some of the older ones made him freeze in his tracks. The Duke found the recordings that Arya used to communicate with her old servants in the Count's house. The boy realized that in fact the girl was very unhappy at home. After that, his memories came to an end and we returned to the room again. Arya was lying on the bed, resting, ready to come to her senses at any moment. All the maids fussed around the girl, worried about her health. Arya woke up and didn't understand why everyone was acting this way. The girl was pleased that all this time these maids were looking after her. Dana again considered the young mistress very small and fragile and gently stroked her head. The other young maids were also delighted with such a cute appearance. Arya enjoyed the attention and kindness of the people around her. But suddenly she remembered something, sat down on the bed and took the head maid's hand. The girl tried to write a message on her palm with her finger. The head maid replied that everything was fine with Mother, and the young master gave her a pen. He also came in while the girl was sleeping and returned her bag. However, in addition to the usual things, there was also a note from the young gentleman himself. This note confused our young main character a little. However, the head maid said that the young Duke was actually treating her well. The young maids wished Arya to get well soon and take her medicine. They gave her a jar full of candies in the shape of multicolored stars. Arya had never seen such beautiful sweets that looked like precious stones. She carefully took out one of the stars, then brought it to her mouth, intending to taste it. The girl carefully put the candy in her mouth, trying to feel the taste. Such a sweet sight made the maids' hearts almost jump out of their chests. Then they placed a lot of flower pots with different flowers in front of her. The head maid said that it was impossible to go outside yet, so they brought flowers into the room. Also, knights were brought into the room, who from today will have to temporarily guard the young mistress. Arya looked and counted 6 knights on her alone. However, it seemed to her that one of these young men had an extremely pleased face. The girl looked at him and tried to understand whether it was because he was brought in by force. The girl was a little upset because she didn't want to force anyone to take care of her. Suddenly, her whole body shook and she sneezed. Arya sweetly rubbed her nose, removing traces of the disease from her face. Looking around, the girl noticed that the maids were clearly upset about something. The girls gathered in a circle and were animatedly discussing something, periodically glancing at the young mistress. They were amazed at how beautiful she was, even when she was sick. The head maid ordered all the flowers to be removed immediately due to possible allergies. Arya was a little upset by this, but did not do anything. The maid admitted that this was the first time she was caring for a sick person who had arrived from abroad. Arya was very curious about what this word meant, so she asked her question thanks to the new pen. Dana replied that the border was the mountain range surrounding Valentine. Both people and animals born in the duchy are healthier and stronger than people outside. After that, Arya remembered Lloyd's words that she didn't belong here. However, the maid continued, saying that the heirs of the family's blood stood out even against their background. Therefore, with all their love, they prepared food recommended for colds. However, the maids were a little annoyed that the taste of ginger might seem too strong to the mistress. The young maid suggested mixing fresh eggs with honey and milk in this case. However, she also rejected this recipe because it could cause food poisoning. Such care at the same time pleased and bothered the young girl a little. She was very pleased to feel that someone valued her. Suddenly, the girl heard a phrase spoken by one of her guards. The young man was clearly not happy about being introduced to her. He said that it is not even known whether such a bride will be able to give birth to a healthy heir. Arya didn't want to let him get away with this, so she wrote a note. She then waved her hand, calling this knight closer to her. The young man understood her call and came closer to the mistress. He made a caustic remark about the young girl's inability to speak. This remark was so rude that all the maids turned against him. However, the knight stood and watched the reaction of his young mistress. Arya looked at him for a very long time and looked expectantly, after which the knight bowed before her and asked for forgiveness for his discourtesy. He clearly did not do this sincerely, which was noticeable to everyone around him. The guy tried to justify himself by saying that even a person from a line of knights could not withstand such a thing, and such a weak person, a lady, even more so. However, in response to this, Arya only sighed tiredly and shook her head. The girl took a new sheet of paper and, using a pen, asked the knight his age. The young guy replied that he was currently 24 years old, after which Arya wrote that by this age the guy had not achieved anything on his own. The girl wrote that she just had a sick body, so she would get better by taking medicine. However, she does not know what a knight with such a sick soul needs to do in order to be healed. The knight was offended by the lady's words, which she expressed in the presence of strangers. In response, the guy asked if the girl herself had achieved anything on her own, to which Arya again took a blank sheet of paper and began to write something there. In response, she promised to grow and try not to become like this knight. This answer made the young guy very angry, so he even insulted the lady with a swear word. Suddenly, the painfully familiar voice of the young master came from behind. It was he who himself appeared in this room to visit the patient. The Duke walked in quietly without attracting attention, observing the conflict from the sidelines. He was already taking out his weapon, intending to punish the obstinate knight. However, he noticed young Arya waving her head and asking him to stop. After that, the young Duke turned his gaze to the cut on the girl's neck. He realized that he himself had not treated her so well just recently. After that, the gentleman put the sword back into its sheath and began to interrogate the knight. He demanded to know what he meant when he recently called her a wench. The knight was horrified by such threats and began to apologize. He admitted that he did not realize the deep meaning of the words spoken by the lady, after which the young master ordered the guy to kneel in front of her as an apology. The knight immediately hurried to fulfill this demand. He fell to his knees, bowed his head before the young girl, and asked for her forgiveness. Arya was amazed at how quickly he rushed to fulfill the Duke's request, and the gentleman himself at that moment scolded Arya for tolerating such an attitude towards herself. The guy reached into the left pocket of his trousers with his hand, intending to pull something out of them. Then he handed the girl an iron brass knuckles in the shape of an animal's paw. The young Duke said that he was transferring all his powers to Arya while he himself was away, after which he said to independently deprive this knight of his title and send him to the stable. Then he turned around and was about to leave the room, but stopped at the last moment. He also asked the girl to prepare a place to stay outside before he returned. After that, Arya lay down to rest, and then woke up from a strange knocking sound. The girl got out of bed, put on her slippers, and walked towards the strange sounds. She sweetly rubbed her eyes, which were still cloudy from her nap. The girl saw that it was the same carrier pigeon knocking on the window. He had a small note tied to his paw, which Arya untied. The girl unfolded the message and began to read it slowly. It was a message in which a girl who was about to die thanked the spring fairy for giving her hope. Arya was immediately afraid that Madam Mother saw the girl singing and revealed her identity. However, she was reassured by the fact that the letter was addressed to the spring fairy, after which Arya wrote a response message and tied it to the pigeon's leg. Then she went out onto the balcony, lifted the bird up and sent it flying. The girl set out to save the mistress's life until several seasons had passed and spring came again. After that, she returned back to her room and began to think about what had happened. She realized that, unfortunately, her 10-year-old body had its limits. A girl can die instantly if she sings a song of healing or a song of death. Therefore, the young lady realized that she needed a place to practice singing. The young lady began to walk throughout the palace, looking for a suitable place. It was during such a walk that the head maid discovered her. She carefully stopped her mistress because she needed to rest. The girl's famous sparkling gaze didn't even work on her. Arya didn't want to give up so early, so she continued to beg to let her go. She used the most plaintive of all her plaintive glances. The head maid resisted with all her might, trying to resist the sight of the cutie. However, she still gave in and asked to be sure to return before the sun set. She also asked the young lady to ask those around her for help if she got lost again. Young Arya, of course, promised to fulfill all her requests. Then the girl changed into more appropriate clothes and went further to explore the palace. She was amazed at how spacious the building was. Suddenly, something caught her attention and appeared from behind her. It was the young lady who was knocked to the floor by one of the huge dogs of the duchy. Arya instantly came to her senses and recognized this beautiful dog. The girl tried to look around in search of the place where the animal came running from. However, she couldn't find anything, so she decided to just pet the dog. Even she thought she understood what this animal was talking about. So she decided to test her guess in several other ways. Arya ordered to give her a paw, and the dog obediently put his paw on her hand. The girl ordered him to lie down and immediately fell like a dog with his muzzle to the ground. Then the young lady ordered the dog to do a somersault, and she immediately began to spin. The girl joyfully continued to stroke her new friend's head. After that, Arya carefully climbed onto the dog's back and asked to be shown some quiet place in the castle. However, on the way, they came across the eldest gentleman of the Valentine family. The girl did not expect to see him in this part of the palace at all and was surprised. The Duke was also amazed that he found the girl in such a strange position. He clearly didn't expect Arya to ride his hound like a horse. Carefully, he pulled the girl off the dog and asked her to treat him more kindly in future, to which Arya mentally noted that he could have treated her more kindly. Meanwhile, the Duke carefully lowered the young lady to the floor. Then he asked why she wandered into this part of the palace and what business she had with him. However, the girl looked at him and could not answer anything. She lowered her gaze and tried to come up with some adequate reason for being here. In fact, she simply did not know how best to address him. Suddenly, something came to her mind. The girl decided to use this idea. She took out pieces of paper from her purse and wrote a message on them. The butler was a little shocked by these words. He was upset that the young lady had a very cruel life before, and the girl continued to write her message further. However, it seemed that the Duke himself was not at all affected by her words. He found her messages merely amusing to him. Arya thought that she needed to somehow show her emotions more clearly. Therefore, the girl tried to smile as sincerely and widely as possible. After that, the three of them, accompanied by the wolf, moved to the Duke's office. Arya looked around, trying to get a better look at her surroundings. The Archduke was amazed that the girl missed him and therefore decided to visit. Arya nodded affirmatively in response to his assumption with all her might. The Duke smiled, slightly unsettled by this manifestation of feelings towards him. He came closer to her girlfriend and asked if she wanted to play with him now. Only now did the girl realize that she could not come to him just like that. And at this time, the Duke was already thinking about what they could do together. He suggested that he should play with her the way he does with his son. However, the butler understood that something was far from an ordinary game, so it was better not to. He recalled that the lady had arrived from abroad, especially since she had just recently been ill. Arya was surprised by the butler's strange reaction. Not the most rosy thoughts came into her head with blood. The Duke, meanwhile, wondered what the girl intended to do after her recovery. She also answered him that she would like to play here with the wolf, after which the animal immediately realized that the girl was talking about him and was delighted. However, the Duke said that why did she come to him then if she just wanted to play with the wolf? After this, Arya realized her mistake and decided to correct herself. She said that it would be enough for her to just sit quietly next to her father. However, suddenly her eyes and nose began to water due to the strange smoke. It came from cigarettes that were lying on the ashtrays on the table in the office. The butler remarked that indirect smoking was harmful to a lady with such a weak body, so he advised asking the lady to come next time. However, instead, the Duke simply put out the cigarettes and ordered the office to be left to ventilate. The butler walked to the balcony and opened the doors wide, letting in fresh air. A rather strong gust of north wind immediately rushed into the room. Arya even began to tremble from such sharp, cold air. The Duke was amazed at how sensitive the girl was, so he took off his jacket and pulled it over her shoulders and head, thus covering the girl from the cold. The Duke then reached down to the floor and picked up one of the notes. He carefully placed the card in his back pocket, trying not to wrinkle it. Then he invited her to sit next to him and just relax. Arya did not understand his request a little, but the wolf was clearly pleased. After this, the girl suddenly realized that it was difficult for her to breathe. The Duke looked at her and just grinned, advising her to breathe more carefully. Arya mentally thought that everything that was happening was actually only because of him. After which the Duke returned to his desk and began to sort out the documents. The young lady and her faithful wolf sat down next to him and watched. They didn't really have to do anything, just watch from the sidelines. Suddenly, something lying on the Duke's table attracted the girl's attention. She remembered that in the past, all ambassadors sent to the duchy found themselves on the verge of life and death. But the aristocrats condemned this behavior of the Valentine family among themselves. However, now the girl realized that these were just tricks of the aristocracy. The Duke was just listening to the butler talk about the investigation into the intrusion in the forest. He even began to wonder if he should really kill everyone. However, the butler warned that this could cause problems with the rest of the noble houses. Therefore, at the moment, the Duke sat and came up with another strategy. He calmly tapped his fingers on the table, anticipating how low his enemies would fall. He dreamed of making them crawl under his feet, begging for death. After this, the work was calmer. The Duke signed orders. From time to time, he paid attention to what Arya wanted to talk about. The girl tried to help as best she could, coming up with insidious plans together. Her ideas made the Duke laugh, distracting him from his gloomy mood. However, the girl did not understand what made the Duke laugh so much, because she proposed this all seriously. The head of the clan said that the girl's words were quite wise, and in gratitude for this, he allowed her to meet with him every day. That's why today the girl sat on the wolf, but he took her in a completely different direction. Arya arrived at the very estate where she was bought on the very first day. There she met her knights, but asked them to remain quiet. The young people were amazed at how beautiful the young lady was. They thought that the girl was investigating some case, so Arya decided to play along with them. For now, she was coming up with her own legend, then she began to write it down. The girl tried to make her look as believable as possible. The girl told the knights that she was investigating a murder case. The knights first shuddered in surprise, then began to laugh. The guys admitted that the girl came right to the address, because murders happened here every day. However, the girl decided not to be distracted by their jokes and returned to her investigation. She stood outside the door and overheard how the Duke communicated with his guest. At this time, the head reprimanded a certain Viscount for the intrusion. This Viscount spread a rumor about Valentine's curse, but the truth was that it was a common parasite infestation. The master's vassals arbitrarily entered someone else's territory, ate something there, and became infected. Because of this, their leader had to appear in person to the Duke and ask for forgiveness. However, this was not so easy to do because he had already taken out a weapon. The Duke said that he came here simply to watch how they humiliated themselves before him. The butler tried to restrain his master as best he could. He understood perfectly well that he was clearly in trouble in such a situation. Arya overheard that the Viscount had come to sell a family heirloom. The Duke was satisfied with this proposal from his invaders. He even gave a reprieve. The head of the clan was about to put the weapon back in its sheath. However, the guest tried to object that the delay was too short. This impudent statement clearly did not please Duke Valentine himself. Therefore, the guest had nothing to do but agree to such conditions. He sharply opened the door and left the office. Arya barely had time to jump to the side. The Viscount was clearly annoyed that this girl was here. The color of her hair seemed very familiar to him, so he extended his hand. The man grabbed the bunny mask and tore it off the poor girl's face. After that, his face lit up with a terrible smile from the fact that he recognized her. He had seen his mother earlier and realized their resemblance almost instantly. The girl tried to cover her face with her hands so that no one could see it. However, an adult man grabbed her wrists and tried to pull her hands away from her face. He was glad that now he could listen to the songs of such a beautiful girl. He clearly hoped that the young lady had inherited her mother's skills. He even thought that perhaps the emperor himself might like the girl. After these words, Arya was flooded with memories of her past life, spent in a cage. Suddenly, someone covered the girl's eyes with his hand so that she could not see anything. There was a crunch of bones being broken and metals cutting skin. The girl carefully moved her hand away from her eyes, intending to look at what was happening. She remembered how the young master had saved her in the past. His father did exactly the same thing now in his new life. Somewhere nearby, the lifeless body of a man collapsed on the cold floor. The butler was disappointed that he would now have to clean up here. However, he admitted that he himself had dreamed about this for quite a long time. The Duke noticed that Arya was incredibly afraid of this man. She had a desperate look. The man realized that the girl really didn't want it to be revealed that she was the siren's daughter. So he carefully lifted and returned Arya's mask to her face. After this, he ordered the girl to bring a list of members of the congregation who might recognize her. The butler was clearly not very happy with how much work he still had to do, and at that time the girl wrote words of gratitude on a piece of paper. The butler was amazed that she thanked the Duke for killing a man in front of her, and he still carefully put his hand on his head and gently stroked it. A few days later, the Duke sat in his study and thought. He looked at all the toys that were lying around here and did not understand why he bought so many. However, he was still happy that he could give his daughter a pleasant feeling. Arya continually thanked him for every little thing he gave. The girl was incredibly happy about the new pots and new toys in her room. The Duke clearly enjoyed the girl's wonderful attitude towards him. He even decided to smoke occasionally. He was in such a good mood. Suddenly, he noticed Arya's gaze directed at him. The girl was sitting, surrounded by toys and literally glowing with happiness. After looking at her, the Duke decided not to light a cigarette, but instead called the girl over to him. Arya slowly walked closer to him, waiting for some kind of request. Instead, I received another gift, a jar filled with colored candies. She decided to share her treasure with her father, inviting him to try them. He was amazed at how much the girl loved such little sweet candies. At this time, the father was recalling the report he received this afternoon about the girl's state of health. The attending physician noticed that her physical health was fine, but the problems were psychological. Therefore, the best treatment now is to simply talk to her, because the girl did not know how to express emotions correctly. However, the Duke was more furious that the doctor knew all this and still could not help the girl. He even wanted to get rid of such a terrible doctor, but the butler immediately restored him. Together, they began to think about what other treatments they could try. The butler noticed that the doctor had failed, but perhaps the Duke himself could heal the lady's soul. And the best idea that came to his mind was to marry the girl off. He even promised to hold a luxurious wedding ceremony. However, Arya was worried about the young master's reaction to this news. So she replied that she did not want to marry anyone, but wanted to stay here and play with her father. To which the Duke remarked that he had heard from the doctor that Arya was not eating well. Therefore, he assured her that he would kill anyone who dared to speak ill of her. If there is a person who looks at her with an unpleasant look, he will tear out his eyes. If there is a man who unceremoniously reaches out to a girl, he will cut off his wrist. So he knelt down in front of the girl and asked her to sincerely express her emotions without being afraid of anything. Unexpectedly strange words touched the girl to the depths of her soul. Tears rolled down her face. The Duke pressed her to his chest, stroked her head, and let her cry. The next day, Arya turned to her headmaid and asked her to bring her breakfast. The maid was glad that the girl wanted to eat something other than her usual food. They prepared the best food in the world for her and set the whole table. The cook and maids stood near the girl and waited for her reaction to the new food. Arya wrote that everything tasted very soft and airy, and she liked it. After that, more and more treats rained down on her. The girl told her service that she was incredibly grateful to them for such delicious food. With her beautiful smile and warm words, she brought everyone to tears of joy. She was on the mend. It was on this day that young Mr. Lloyd returned to the estate. As soon as he stepped off the carriage onto the ground, he immediately felt that the atmosphere in his house had undoubtedly changed, and now he had to find out why. Young Mr. Lloyd stepped down from the steps of the carriage and saw that he was already being met. Opposite him stood a richly dressed blonde man with hair tied in a ponytail who called our hero brother. The guy returned for the first time in a long time because now it was vacation at his academy and he could visit his family. The guys stopped for a minute and looked around because for some reason everyone was fussing very much. The castle seemed to be in some kind of chaos. Everyone was walking around with various building materials in their hands because a new building was being built. The young Duke called one of the family servants with a wave of his hand, and he brought him some kind of plan. The guy unfolded the scroll, and at this time the blonde approached him from behind and looked over his shoulder. This master plan depicted the Valentine estate and featured the attractions in the background. It was very similar to an amusement park, The young people thought that construction workers were building a luxury liner in the mountain. At this time, the employee confirmed that His Grace the Duke had been allocated to make a playground for the lady. The young master was clearly not very happy with this news. Disappointment showed on his face. Immediately after such news, the blonde wanted to find this young lady and talk to her about why it was necessary to go to the palace in such an ineffective way. But the young gentleman who was walking in front suddenly stood up. He stood on the path in the garden and looked at a large tree under which lay a beautiful picture. A huge black jaguar lay on the ground, and young Arya lay and slept on it. The girl was surrounded on all sides by beautiful animals, be it a cute family of deer, squirrels, or rabbits. All the animals were absolutely not afraid of the girl. On the contrary, among them she looked like a real forest fairy. The blonde was amazed at the girl's innate ability, even though she was a siren, but he didn't think that such a thing was possible. Arya has tamed predators who will never follow anyone but their master. He was amazed that the girl had even tamed the formidable black jaguar. The boy was surprised that the girl managed to tame even the demon duke himself with a very bad reputation. At this time, while the guys stood and looked at the sleeping Arya, she slowly began to wake up. The girl carefully sat down and began to slowly rub her eyes, coming to her senses after a short rest. The girl looked around, but no one was standing nearby. Only small traces remained not far from her place of daytime sleep. She still didn't understand who it was, so she decided to go to the castle and continue with her business. And there a wonderful lunch awaited her. On the plate there was a piece of fish, some seafood, and fruit. The girl carefully cut off a piece of fish, poured lemon juice on it, and put it into her mouth with pleasure. It was absolutely clear from her face that she liked the food. The head maid carefully removed the excess food from Arya's mouth with a napkin and said that all the servants were incredibly happy that the girl had recently begun to eat well. Arya herself thought that recently she had gained a little weight, and for the first time she had fat on her stomach. However, she also understood that this was still not enough, since she could not sing either songs of healing or songs of destruction. The song of healing is one that can cure any disease if the person has not yet crossed the line. And the song that she sang most in her past life, the one that even the emperor, who was not afraid of anything under them, longed for, is the song of destruction. A song that can completely destroy not only the body, but also the mind of the enemy. The girl could have sung these two songs in a past life, when she was 14 years old. But in this life, she must reduce the remaining time in any way, because the Valentine event will happen in 4 years. So the girl tried to eat more and grow as quickly as possible, which all her servants were very happy about. Therefore, she was immediately brought the next dish, namely a wonderful piece of well-done meat. The girl deftly handled the knife and fork, cutting herself small pieces from the portions. Seeing all this, her maid asked if the young lady had ever received training in table etiquette. This question took young Arya by surprise. She even flinched in surprise. Meanwhile, the maid continued to say that starting from the mistress's steps, her every movement was non-trivial. At this moment, Arya thought that she was too careless, because table etiquette could not help but manifest itself externally in the direction of such dishes, and after revealing her siren ability in a past life, her father taught her this. Therefore, the girl decided to play along with the maid a little and deliberately dropped the fork from her hand. After that, she made a sad face and wrote on a piece of paper that she was too hungry, so she had no strength. All her maids at that moment literally gaped in surprise and looked at their mistress in silence. Arya thought that she had told too obvious a lie. However, the next second, literally all of her assistants rushed across each other, wanting to cut the meat for their mistress. They were all so carried away by the decision of who would cut the meat that the young lady did not wait for help. Therefore, while everyone else was busy, the head maid decided to do it. Immediately after this, everyone noticed that this position had already been occupied while they were arguing among themselves. The weather outside was beautiful. It was the flowering season of summer plants. Therefore, the maids decided to dress their mistress just as brightly, so that she, too, would look like a beautiful flower. The girl was dressed in a beautiful yellow dress. Jewelry was added to her neck to match it, and her hair was also tied with beautiful ribbons. The head maid also said that the young duke had just returned from the academy yesterday and offered to take Arya to him. The girl was a little scared at first by such news, so she shook her head from side to side. She thought that Lloyd would definitely send her away, asking why she had recovered but still not disappeared. After which, Arya suddenly jumped up from her chair and ran, which made her maid laugh. The girl went to the quietest place where she could sit quietly, to the library. She only thought that it was better not to meet with Lloyd for now. It was better not to irritate him, if possible, until his mother's illness was cured. Only now did the girl notice how many wonderful books were around her, and it immediately occurred to her that there was no place as good as this for singing practice. Suddenly a noise was heard a little further from the girl. Arya immediately looked back at it. A young blonde guy stood opposite her with a book in his hands and looked at the girl in the same way. Arya had never seen him here before, so she didn't know how to react. But the young, beautiful blonde smiled brightly at the girl and greeted her, calling her his daughter-in-law. Arya then remembered that she had been told about a relative of Duke Valentine who received recognition for his genius and was adopted. Vincent Valentine was a genius of the era. He became a symbol of a drastic change in life when he was established as the strongest authority that even the emperor did not dare to act unceremoniously. Arya also remembered that in a past life, due to rumors that the guy was a double spy, his kicked out of the duchy, after which he became interested in alcohol and drugs, and then ended his life wandering in a ditch, so he was nicknamed the Genius of Misfortune. And while the girl was remembering all this, the guy became interested in the book that she held in her hands, because it was a philosophical work quite difficult to understand. Arya just accidentally took the first book she came across, and the guy had already managed to load it with a huge stream of abstruse words, arguing that the doctrine of being and the theory of knowledge are two sides of the same coin. However, seeing the confusion on the girl's face, the guy stopped and apologized for the fact that, due to his genius, he could not restrain himself at all when looking at the stupid people. Vincent noticed that stupid people like Arya are better off not living and not using extra oxygen. He would rather die than live with a retarded intellect, which made Arya think that this guy was kicked out in a past life because he is rude and arrogant upstart. The girl clearly felt discomfort from the fact that this guy constantly continued to walk around her and boasted of his incredible intelligence, all the time humiliating and belittling her. Wherever she went, he followed her with his eyes and gave moral lectures, which greatly irritated the girl. The girl got together and decided, on the contrary, to try to make friends with this guy, after which she approached him and asked him to recommend a book to her. Vincent immediately took one of the nearest ones, looked at its name, and threw it into the girl's hands, after which he would continue to sit with a calm expression of peace on his face. And Arya looked at the tutorial on basic mental arithmetic, which even a mentally retarded child can handle in her hands. Such disrespect and open mockery brought the girl into a real rage. She looked like a volcano that was about to explode. This went on for several days in a row. Even the maids noticed that the girl was in a bad mood. And Arya thought only that because of this guy she could not continue her singing training, because every time he ends up in the library and interferes with her privacy. So this time the guy was already waiting for her in the library. He didn't let her leave and started talking nonsense about her family of brilliant musicians. And Arya couldn't stand this anymore, so she decided to put the upstart in her place. The girl threw the book into the guy's hands, then proudly walked up to the organ and sat down at this huge, beautiful instrument without saying a word. Vincent tried to drive the girl away because of this masterpiece, believing that it should not be desecrated by pathetic, childish attempts to play some melody. However, as soon as the girl's fingers touched the instrument and began to produce the first chords, it instantly shut up. Arya, without a single mistake, played the best works of her ancestors, a masterpiece of the era, on an angelic musical instrument that guides the souls of people to heaven, which the master himself once called this organ the emperor among musical instruments. Arya flawlessly played all the pieces from beginning to end, then stood up, turned to the young man and asked with just her lips that he would leave her alone. Such a performance touched the guy to the depths of his soul, because he didn't even notice how he was listening to a beautiful melody and completely immersed himself in the work. The guy did not prevent the girl from leaving this time. He was glad that his plan to bring her abilities to light worked as it should, and the girl herself turned out to be an overwhelming genius. The next day, Vincent specially arranged a tea party for Arya, although the girl was going to go look at the summer flowers that had recently bloomed in the garden, and now she was forced to sit here and listen to how the blonde man kept calling himself a genius. Now he became more friendly towards her, even asking if she was in the library all the time in order to practice the game away from constant observers. The guy also noticed that the girl was forced to hide her face behind a mask because she had the beauty of a genius, like himself. Arya could no longer listen to his wonderful genius and believed that the guy had gone crazy while he was only studying. She only thought that the difference between a genius and a fool was one step away. Vincent at that time did not notice anything and continued to talk about his own brilliant appearance. In the end, the girl's attention was attracted by the book that was in the guy's hands. It was the manuscript of the code before it was edited, and the guy read all the laws that would be re-edited after. Arya didn't understand why read the old codex if a new one would be coming out soon anyway, but Vincent asked the girl not to change the topic. The guy noticed that there are no people in this world who would hate young geniuses, despite the fact that everyone is trying to cheat, calling themselves geniuses and even lying about their age. But the daughter-in-law really was like that. Arya at that moment recalled that her father also called her a genius, because in addition to perceiving an incredible range of sounds, the girl had such outstanding hearing that once she heard a song, she could repeat it exactly. In this, the girl even surpassed her own mother and her father, who one day praised her as if it were a heaven-given talent. The next scolded her because she created a noise that hurt the ears. But in the end, the man was only jealous of his own daughter's talent, saying that he should have inherited it. Arya looked at her father, who was destroyed daily by his own feelings of inferiority, and became convinced that she had received a God-given talent. Her grandfather was a brilliant composer of the era, her mother was a siren with the ability of a legendary monster, and the girl inherited from them a brilliant musical talent and absolute pitch, the paradise timbre. Seeing the girl's talent, anyone began to envy and crave it. That's why Arya understood so well why Vincent was annoyed. However, she herself thought that never in her life had she been happy because she was born with an outstanding talent. For her, it was the complete opposite. It made her feel like a wounded bird in a golden cage. The guy continued to say that Valentine loved art more than any other activity, so the Duke would fully support the girl if she only asked. But his words made Arya sad, because the girl could no longer count how many times she had gone through this in her past life. After all, there once was a time when, thanks to her genius, she became a real god for the Emperor. Later, the girl realized that a person could never become a god. Therefore, Arya decided to interrupt her friend's tirade by writing his name on the paper, and he was glad that the girl called him for the first time. However, Arya continued to write that if you lived because you were a genius, you would die because you were a genius from people who praised you as a genius. These words made the smile disappear from the guy's face. He himself was confused by such words. The girl continued to write that the recognition of other people is so fleeting that it will not last even 10 years. Therefore, he did not need to make every effort to gain recognition. He did not have to try proving his genius. If someone does his job, then recognition will come to him naturally. The guy was clearly embarrassed that the girl got to the heart of the matter. He was surprised that she was thinking about such things, to which the guy clarified whether the girl's disdainful attitude towards him was also natural. He noticed that with her calm gaze, his daughter-in-law was very similar to his brother. Even just breathing calmly, she shines more dazzlingly than the sun. The guy again began to argue that the sun is destined to envy the wind and continue to praise himself, so Arya decided to besiege him again. The girl said that by constantly behaving so arrogantly, he would die from being hit by a stone. Therefore, she advised him to mind his own business and be happy that everything was working out for him. After that, there was an awkward silence at the table. Both of them were silent. Dessert was waiting on the young people's plates. Fresh tea in mugs was gradually cooling down. Vincent was a little embarrassed to be confronted by such a young girl, so he tried to make it a joke. However, Arya was no longer going to stand on ceremony with him and said that this was not a joke, but the real truth, so she would like Vincent to disappear. This struck the guy to the very heart, because before that everyone only loved him for his genius. There was an awkward silence at the table again. The atmosphere was darker than a cloud. The guy looked at his daughter-in-law Arya and thought that she was completely different from the rumors. Everyone told him that she had a sweet and charming personality, like a child her age, but he definitely already received that callous, cold-blooded look from his brother. He didn't expect that his daughter-in-law's real character was so poisonous, so he decided to clarify what exactly she considered her business to be. The girl gave him a very evasive answer to this, saying that her case was very simple and it had already been decided for a long time. The most important and only thing she wants and will do in life is to protect her loved one. A new calm day arrived at the Duke's beautiful estate. His garden was in bloom. Arya walked slowly along the beautiful path through this garden, thinking about her own things. Recently, she had a little hobby, so the girl was looking for someone. Then she looked up and smiled happily at what she had finally found. Arya raised her delicate hand up and extended it so that the white carrier pigeon could land on her finger. Today, instead of another letter, a beautiful flower was waiting for the girl. It was a small twig of cherry that someone picked and put into the beak of a dove. At this time, at the other end of this beautiful castle was the Duchess's bedroom. The woman felt better but was still very sick. Now is a period of time when she did not even have the strength to write a letter. So instead, the woman carefully picked a sprig of her favorite plant, then placed it in the bird's beak and sent it to her secret friend. However, thanks to this message, the girl realized that a critical moment was again approaching in the Duchess's health. The girl thanked her carrier pigeon and wanted to give him a new task. However, the dove suddenly took off from her finger and flew away without permission. At first, the girl did not understand what made her friend fly away so quickly, but then she heard footsteps behind her. She immediately realized that someone else had come, so she turned around to look. And on the path opposite her stood the young Duke and his black jaguar. The guy looked at her from under his brows and did not say a word at that time. Arya also looked at him and couldn't understand what she should do next. Maybe he was going to drive her away again. At this time, the young gentleman's jaguar waved its tail several times and walked towards the girl with an imposing gait. Arya thought that his fur was the same color as the hair of the young Duke, so she wanted to pat the jaguar on the head. But as soon as the girl extended her hand to him, the huge cat immediately moved his head to the side. Arya tried again, but the animal again avoided contact with her palm. The girl tried several more times, but the result was always the same. Arya was upset that she was able to easily find a common language with the wolves, but the jaguar did not want to let her near him. This huge cat always approaches first, but always avoids touching, so the girl did not understand what to do with him, and the Duke looked at all this in silence. He did not understand what his bride and his pet, who were playing so funny, were doing. However, this is not what the guy came here for. He heard that the girl never once used the powers the young Duke left her. That's why he came here today, to remind the girl that now she no longer has these powers. Instead, he was now standing here and wasting his precious time. The guy was clearly annoyed and suggested that if the girl wanted it that way, he could kick her out empty-handed, so that she would not have prepared either housing or even a penny of money. Arya just looked at him silently and didn't say anything, just extended her hand forward. The guy did not expect such strange behavior from the girl, but something excited him. He ordered her to stop and headed towards her. At this time, the girl continued to play with the jaguar, not noticing anything around her. She woke up only when the young gentleman hit her on the hand, and it began to hurt very much. Arya thought that if the guy had hit with all his might, his arm would have broken. Fortunately, he missed, so it was just a little swollen. But the guy with a worried expression on his face came close to the girl. He also remained silent, only looking down at her wounded hand. Then the young Duke suddenly began to scold the girl for continuing to approach the predator. However, seeing that she did not understand anything, he became confused and did not understand what to do next. He carefully took the girl's hand in his and began to examine her from all sides. And at this time, he was still thinking that the girl was too careless, because you can't give your hand to anyone so easily. The guy was clearly very annoyed by such a strange and atypical behavior of the girl. Therefore, he took her to the side and carefully fixed her hand in one position, attaching a fixing board to it. Arya thought at this moment that her arm was not even broken, whether the Duke was giving her excessive first aid. Lloyd continued to say that the girl's body was too weak, but wasn't this also one of her tricks? He believed that the girl deliberately injured herself and fell ill at the moment when they were going to kick her out. After all, only such a trick made him worry about the girl and did not allow him to throw her out. The guy winced when he realized that he had let slip that he was worried about the girl. After that, he immediately turned away from her and pretended as if nothing had happened, after which he stood up and told his fiancée that it was better for her to really leave this time after recovery. Arya looked at him and even became a little embarrassed, and the Duke could not understand what her look meant. And at that moment, the girl thought only that the jaguar was very similar to its owner in appearance and character. After that, the young duke indicated the direction to the nearest hospital and left, and Arya was glad that Lloyd turned out to be really very gentle. After which, the girl went straight to the library to practice singing. Its song is divided into 7 main types, although it branches into countless numbers. Among them were the Song of Peace, the Song of Life, the Song of Enchantment, the Song of Oblivion, the Song of Sweet Dreams, the Song of Healing, and the Song of Destruction. It was at this point that the girl felt suddenly. She grabbed her dress with her hand and stopped singing. She slowly sank to the ground and tried to gradually catch her breath. She was worried that her singing was not getting better at all, although she ate well, walked, and even exercised diligently. She sings other songs freely, but she cannot even pronounce the songs of death and healing. She did not have much time to train, because after some time the Duchess could already die without waiting for help. The girl was very worried about this, so she lay down on the floor and began to think about what backup options she had. Arya thought that she had already reached the desired level once, so she thought that by practicing hard, she would someday be able to reach it faster. The girl lay there and thought that she should have come up with some more effective and faster way. However, absolutely nothing came to her mind for quite a long time. Suddenly, some idea or unexpected decision came into her mind. Arya immediately jumped up and sat upright on the floor, further thinking about a new idea. In fact, the girl remembered her feeling when she first arrived in the forest that surrounded the Duke's estate. It occurred to her that an illusory barrier could be an obstacle to her further development and the revelation of her powers. The person who created such barriers has raised his energy management abilities to the appropriate level. Energy is a basic property that differs in type depending on the person, so at least this person should have had more basics than Arya herself. The girl immediately got up and headed to the exit from the library, thinking about what kind of energy that person controlled, because she was of an unfamiliar appearance. The young lady knew that the most common types of energy were sacred forces and mana. The girl walked along the corridor, not noticing anything around. At the last second, Arya looked up and pressed her nose against a huge stack of books. The girl collided with the one who was carrying them, after which they both fell to the floor. Arya fell on her butt and rubbed her lower back as leaves slowly fell all around her, after which the girl noticed that some documents were scattered around her. I quickly looked at a few sheets and realized that it was a new, edited codex. The man the girl encountered was clearly angry and even began to swear, but immediately fell silent as soon as he saw who he had crossed paths with. He instantly recognized the young lady who had become a bride in this house not long ago. The man immediately rushed to apologize to the girl, but she asked him to introduce himself first. The man was clearly dissatisfied with the fact that such a young lady was commanding him, but still introduced himself by the name Risen Stewart. Baron Stewart said that he was here to put in order the documents written by other secretaries. Carefully straightening her dress, Arya thought that this is a political position. There is nothing strange for him to be here. At this time, the Baron apologized and began to collect his sheets of documents scattered all over the floor. After that, the man turned around and was about to leave. He was worried about why the young lady was looking at him so strangely and intently. I was worried that the girl could see the contents of these documents. He reassured himself that she could not have time to read them in a period in which not even 30 seconds had passed. Moreover, they said that the lady was still very young. He suspected that she had not yet been properly trained in the rules of etiquette. The man thought that even if now the girl is self-willed in the female, she will still be kicked out soon. On the day of the Duchess's death, this child will also be outside the threshold. Arya continued to stand in one place silently and look after the departing Baron. The girl had a very bad feeling about this man because of the documents that he defended. At that moment, Arya understood why Vincent constantly read only the codex in the library. The girl guessed their possible goal, but for now decided not to do anything but only observe. After which she calmly walked to the castle window and looked down. Just at that time, the Baron was passing by and carrying documents somewhere. The girl folded 2 fingers and brought them to her mouth. A whistle was heard. At that very moment, her beautiful carrier pigeons flew up to her, obeying the orders of the young mistress. Arya pointed her finger down directly towards the walking man, giving orders to her assistants. The Baron heard a strange sound coming from above. He looked up and saw a flock of pigeons. The birds attacked the man, trying to peck him in the head, then in the shoulders, arms, forcing him to run away. After which the birds began to snatch documents from the stack that the Baron was carrying and lift them up. The man was clearly terrified that something might happen to these pieces of paper. He was more worried about them than about himself. The Baron screamed at the white birds and ran after them everywhere, trying to collect all the scattered papers back into the pile. Arya looked down at him from the window and watched the man's actions from the side. As soon as the girl was convinced that she was right, she immediately turned around, closed the window, and moved away from him. The girl only thought that she really needed to meet that person as soon as possible. She didn't have time to investigate. As soon as the young lady took a few steps towards the exit, she immediately met her old and good friend. It was right in her path that the huge gray wolf, Silver, was barking and wagging his tail with happiness and joy. The girl came closer to the animal and affectionately stroked its head, because she also missed it. She asked the wolf who was the strongest after his master, the young master and herself. Apparently, the wolf immediately understood what exactly he was being asked about, so he barked joyfully in response, so Arya asked to be taken to this man. The girl followed the wolf, who led her to one of the tall towers, which clearly stood out from the rest. It was one of 2 towers that were located on the territory of the Duke's estate, but the wolf still did not stray far from his mistress, protecting her. Arya raised her head up and immediately felt that the room she needed was on the top floor of this tower. The girl approached the huge, massive wooden door, which was the only entrance. Arya stood there for a moment, then came closer and gently knocked on the door with her hand. However, there was only silence in response. The girl tried to knock several more times, but no one opened. However, she definitely felt that this person was behind the door. He simply ignored the intruder. After that, Arya thought about how she could get inside and decided to use the power of her wolf. The girl ordered the animal to open the door and let her in, after which the huge wolf smashed the door with all its strength with one blow. After which the girl finally got into the room and was surprised at what a pogrom there was around. The wolf stood nearby and happily accepted gratitude for being able to help his mistress, after which the girl stroked his head. The owner of the building responded to this noise and immediately cursed at the sight of uninvited guests and the broken door. The man was unhappy that such a mess had been made in his laboratory, but still greeted the guests. The magician of this palace, Carlin, was still indignant that people could enter his house just like that. At this time, Arya was thinking that for such a lawbreaker, a magician who felt so confident in the tower, the demon palace was really best suited. And Carlin was only worried that he was again disturbed and interrupted while working. He assumed that the girl would act like all ordinary children and call him a wizard. Therefore, the man said that this was not a game. He was not a good wizard capable of fulfilling the young mistress's wishes, and then tried to drive her out. However, as soon as he turned away, the girl immediately returned back and demanded attention to herself. She took out a piece of paper and a pen and began to write something on it, then picked it up and showed it to the magician. The girl asked to tell her how to use energy, which greatly surprised Carlin. The man thought that this young girl, like other children, would ask to be taught magic. Therefore, he was surprised that the girl knew about such a concept as energy. Energy is a general name for mana, divine power, magical power, spirit power, and the like. There is energy inside every person, but not everyone can use it. Even with good potential, but with an insufficient amount of energy, the moment it leaves the core, a person will die. So those who could release such an amount of energy beyond the core are 1 in 10 million, like himself. However, the young lady was more interested in how long it usually took people to learn how to control energy. Carlin's answer about 5-6 years of work seemed too long to the girl. Therefore, after this, she wondered if it was possible to forcibly extract the energy from this core. She clearly asked a very stupid question, because the magician tiredly raised his hand to his face and sighed for a long time. Then he angrily shouted at the young mistress and called her crazy for asking such questions. He began to explain to her that if a person loses all his blood, he will die. The same will happen to him if he loses all the energy of his core. However, the lady was only interested in whether this method was the only way to subjugate the energy in the shortest possible time. The magician answered in the affirmative and even said that he could help the girl with this. However, he added that it is still impossible to skip your level and you need to know yourself better. It's a miracle that the young lady is even alive, because her energy is so weak, and the moment the core is activated, she will die instantly. It was for this reason that the magician suggested that Arya surrender and offered to escort the girl to the exit. The girl looked sad that she could not persuade the man to help her, and she even decided to follow his advice. However, As soon as she touched him with her hand only for a second, at the same instant the magician felt the real power of her energy, hidden before that. Carlin immediately withdrew his hand and cried out in surprise at such a huge amount of energy. He could not believe that a person could have such a type. He was deceived by the appearance of a young girl. The man immediately guessed that what was standing in front of him was far from an ordinary human girl. And Arya herself realized that she was at her limit and could no longer hide her secret from him. The magician was the only one who could unlock her potential, and the girl had to decide quickly. Therefore, she cast aside her decision to pretend to be mute and loudly confessed to the magician that she was a siren. The man clearly did not expect such a big deception, so even at first he froze and could not utter a word. After which he came to his senses a little, raised his hand and scratched his head with it, thinking. The man understood who he was talking about, of course. He had heard about sirens before, because he was the best magician and scientist. However, he still couldn't believe that such a little girl had been hiding her true strength all this time. He was amazed that the girl's potential reserve of energy was very great. She also knew how to control it, but she absolutely did not know the essence. Arya could not admit to him that she remembers her past life, so she can use this energy. She could hide and control the energy because she had memories of the past, but now the core was blocked, so she had difficulties. Carlin still couldn't believe that such a little girl had so much energy and came out of nowhere. Arya slowly walked closer to the man and pulled his cloak, forcing him to come to his senses. He just patted his hair wearily and took a deep breath, as if he had been burdened with unnecessary problems. After which the man decided to help this young lady and decided to ask her about how she managed her energy. He could not accept that the girl had such artistic and refined talents, but lived such a worthless life. Well, Arya answered that she sang until she vomited blood in order to learn to sing well. The man clearly had nothing to respond to such a confession from the young girl, so he simply looked at her and was silent. Arya began to remember her sad past and the count who ruled her life like a puppet. This terrible man forced himself to accept the siren and let her give birth to a daughter, and then sold her because she could not speak. He managed the lives of many people in such a way as to have the greatest benefit for himself. He didn't even consider the girl to be a person, but now she was standing here and talking about how she wanted to activate the energy core. The man decided to finally help the girl and asked her a question again. He wondered why the girl was in such a hurry and wanted to use her skills. Arya thought that she had said the right things, but from now on her words would sound manic. However, the girl still realized that the man could feel any lie, so she had to tell the truth. She admitted that she wants to change the future and has already begun to describe it. But the man abruptly interrupted her story and asked her not to tell him absolutely nothing about the future. Carlin struggled between wanting to know what was coming and realizing that he couldn't know. Arya was also surprised that a person did not want to know his future, because this is the only thing that usually interests people. However, the man said that no matter what happens in the future, no one can know and change it on their own, because everyone has their own destiny. After all, if you change one fate, won't it become destruction for the entire empire? Everything destined for people must happen independently according to the will of God. Whether it is God or something else, there are laws by which the world itself exists. It may look chaotic, but it obeys immutable rules, like the gears of a mechanism that fit each other perfectly. The girl suddenly felt sad because she understood the meaning of these words. The apple is red, the sky is blue, deer eat grass, lions eat deer, that's the order of life. And people cannot change the future. It is in this very world. Changing the future is like removing an old gear and replacing it with a new one. Therefore, people should not change anything for the world to return to the way it was. This meant that if a girl breaks one law, then a new one will appear in its place. This newest law will arise from her own actions and selfish desires. The price you have to pay for changing the future may be even more expensive and painful than the original one. Young Lady Arya was afraid that this might happen to this world, because if you turn back time to save a life, it goes without saying that another life will be taken in its place. If this continues, the story from her past life will repeat itself. This means that the people who saved her in her past life will still be in danger. Arya recalled the events that led her to the present moment, and the girl understood that she did not want history to repeat itself again. She thought about young Duke Lloyd and her promise to protect him. In the end, the young lady decided that she could not allow this to happen. Therefore, her main task now is to try to convince the magician to help her. Arya noticed that there was something strange in this theory that did not fit into her head. Carlin didn't even immediately understand what exactly this young girl meant. Arya continued to argue that if everything were true, then why does she still remember about the future? The future, she would try to change it somehow. She couldn't just sit here and do nothing. With these words, she managed to achieve the man's loyalty and win him over to her side. Arya suggested that the will of the world is also her own will, which surprised the magician. Knowing that the girl would behave this way, she asked the man to simply follow her will. She admitted that it might not be easy. She might not be able to change anything. However, she must do this. Although she is young, she knows that what is right, if the world is wrong, then she will change it. The magician thought that, in fact, the girl is just a child who believes that there is justice in this world, and that she can change anything with the help of her abilities. The man immediately realized that the girl had lived a far from easy past life, so he could not believe that she still believed in this world. Therefore, he decided to test her first, and asked the young lady to prove her intentions. The girl immediately understood what was required of her, so she asked to leave the palace for a while, after which she returned back and was holding in her hands a simple scroll containing teleportation magic. Of course, the man immediately recognized this magical object. In fact, these scrolls were once stolen from him and were now in the possession of a little girl. The man realized that in this way he himself helped the young girl. The magician asked Arya if he could make a clone to replace her while the girl was away, to which he received an affirmative answer. However, Carlin warned that even in this case the girl should return as soon as possible, because others could be deceived. But His Majesty and the Duke would immediately understand everything, to which Arya promised him to return as quickly as possible before anyone finds her. The man still wasn't sure until the very end that this idea would work. He allowed this scroll to be taken only so that the girl would return immediately if she was in danger. After which Arya unrolled the scroll, then took it in both hands and tore it right in the middle. Thus, the teleportation spell began to come into force and work. At the last moment, the girl was joined in the magic circle by her faithful wolf. The magician did not even have time to react to how quickly the animal rushed to its owner. In a moment, both of them, human and animal, disappeared from the tower. At the same time, Arya instantly found herself in a completely different place. The girl looked around and realized that she had been transported to the Holy Empire of Tarsila. She also very clearly heard a dog barking next to her and looked back. Only now the girl noticed the wolf Silver, who followed her into the magic circle. She was angry and frustrated because the animal could have suffered because of her. She told the wolf not to follow her because it was dangerous. In fact, the animal was worried that the girl had become close to the jaguar. After all, wolves still cannot be faster than jaguars, although Silver was still prettier. Arya looked at the animal for a moment, but it again waved its tail joyfully from side to side. In any case, the girl needed to hurry and follow in the direction where the sun was setting. Although the Holy Empire was called the land chosen by the gods, wherever there is light in this world, darkness exists next to it. Even when the Pope Bishop tried to save the poor, people were still dying of hunger. In the Holy Empire, all local slums were called villages in the east. These used to be abandoned lands, all in ruins. But when wanderers and criminals had nowhere to go, they gathered here. This is how this village was formed, in which our heroine and her faithful wolf were now located. The girl walked through the city and tried not to attract any attention to herself. This was very difficult to do, considering that there was practically not a single soul around. Arya decided to hide her unusually colored hair, so she pulled a hood over her head. As soon as the girl thought that she needed to be more careful, she immediately came across a passerby. The man was much larger than the girl herself and had obviously drunk a lot somewhere before. Even now, he stood with a bottle in his hand and shouted for the girl to get out of his way. However, even through his alcohol-clouded mind, the man was able to notice something unusual. I noticed the unusual color of a strand that had escaped from under the hood. The man said that the passerby was worth a lot just by looking at her face, after which he approached the girl, intending to rip off her hood. Arya closed her eyes in fear and prepared for the worst, but then the wolf came to the rescue. He began to growl menacingly and step on the man, opening his mouth as wide as possible. The drunken man was horrified by this sight and ran away from the alley in fear. The young lady was also scared because she was almost kidnapped even though she wasn't even in the city yet. The girl grabbed her huge hood with both hands and tried to pull it as close to her face as possible. Now she walked and tried to look around as often as possible. The girl was also very grateful that the wolf still followed her here. However, he could not go any further, so the young lady ordered him to stay where he was. Silver was too big and could attract unnecessary attention from the bad guys who might follow her because of it. The girl walked for quite a long time along the small walks of this city all alone. While she was walking, it was already getting dark, so the girl had to hurry. Here and there were pleas for help from poor people who were attacked by local robbers. Arya tried to slip through such places unnoticed. Although she felt sorry for the people, she could not help them in any way. The girl only tried to achieve her goal as quickly as possible and was horrified by how cruel the city was. Every second she reminded herself that she should be as careful as possible here. The thing is, Arya wasn't sure if anyone remembered that there was once a temple here, but the current land has lost all its past glory. Everything was destroyed to such an extent that no one knew about the relic hidden here. In a past life, this relic was found by a saint who accused the Valentine family and started a rebellion. Then she also could not believe that the relic was still lying in this temple. No one could find her except the saint, who wandered through the most abandoned places. No one could believe that that saint would fall asleep in a temple abandoned by everyone. Finally, after a long walk, Arya stopped in the middle of the forest and looked into the distance. She was in place because now the ruined temple, which had once been great, spread out before her eyes. The girl came closer to the temple and tiredly leaned her shoulder against its walls. She assumed that the relic's storage location was somewhere nearby. The girl closed her eyes, strained all her senses, tried to find the place where the power came from. She followed these feelings, as if someone was leading her by the hand to a hiding place. Suddenly she realized that she was talking about that very place, so she stopped. She began to look around and finally noticed that very place. It was a large wooden hatch, which was located right in the middle of the clearing. The young lady had to put a lot of effort into lifting such a heavy lid. Suddenly, Arya began to tremble as a man started talking not far from her. The girl decided to find out who was there, so she walked in the direction of the noise. Near the temple, she saw a sleeping young man surrounded by empty alcohol bottles. Therefore, the girl decided to hurry up and return back to the hatch before the man came to his senses and noticed her. Throwing back the heavy lid, Arya began to slowly walk down the wooden stairs. The girl went down for quite a long time until she finally touched the cold floor of the temple. It was much darker around than she thought. If she hadn't been a siren, she wouldn't have been able to see anything here. The young lady walked slowly through the hall, looking around and looking for the supposed hiding place. Suddenly, a tall cabinet with something lying on it caught my eye. The girl came closer and picked up a small wooden box. She then moved the lock to the side and opened it very carefully. Inside lay the most ordinary tree branch, in which no one would ever guess a great relic. Arya carefully took the branch and put it in her cape pocket, after which the girl came to the opposite wall and began to feel it. The young heroine would have immediately realized that in front of her was not an ordinary wall. She moved her hands from one brick to another, trying to find the one she needed. Finally, she found the right stone, and behind it was a hiding place. At first, the girl doubted whether she should look into this hiding place. But then I convinced myself that nothing bad would happen because of this. So she put her hand into a hole in the wall and pulled out a beautiful necklace. And then she remembered that this was the necklace that Saint Veronica had always worn in her past life. Since there was no divine power in this necklace, the girl decided to take it with her. The young lady climbed up the wooden stairs for a long time, and when she finally reached the exit, a surprise awaited her. Before the girl had time to catch her breath, she noticed several men around her. They had clearly been waiting for her here for a long time and were intent on doing something terrible. One of the men grabbed the girl by the collar and pulled her out with one hand like a feather. They wanted to look at the girl's booty, so they took the wooden box. However, the insides of this box were clearly very disappointing. The men were hoping to see something else. Inside was an ordinary stick of wood, so the robbers became furious. They didn't understand why the girl took the branch, hoping that she had found some kind of treasure or something similar when she made her way along the secret path. This whole foray for just one ordinary branch seemed to them a waste of time. However, that was not all, because the siren itself still remained. One man noticed her unusual hair, so he abruptly pulled her cape off the girl. After which the men saw how beautiful the girl herself was. She could be sold for a very high price. They agreed that such a beauty could be sold even to the Duke himself or the ruler of another country. They said that if she walked alone at night, naughty men might kidnap her. At that moment, Arya was thinking that it was not for nothing that she felt uncomfortable with how weak the security was. She didn't want to draw too much attention to herself, But now she had no choice but to sing and erase the memories of these people, because these scary men were already getting closer and closer to her. At that moment, when the girl had already opened her mouth and wanted to sing her song of oblivion, they were interrupted. A young man in noble clothes came out into this very clearing, holding a sword in his hands. The men accepted a form of knightly order, which reports directly to the Vatican. When people noticed the presence of such a person here, they began to fear possible reprisals. Although the young man did not look very strong, he was not accepted into the knightly order for beauty alone. Meanwhile, the guy was surprised that several bandits had united against one person. However, the men quickly recovered from their initial surprise and realized that they were outnumbered, to which the guy reminded them that they act outside the law and God is always watching over them. The bandits were so taken aback by the young man's last phrase that they fell into a slight stupor. But after that, they laughed loudly and began to mock the guy. They were very amused that a guy had gone down to the worst place and spread God's doctrine here. The robbers noticed that if they live badly, then he will have to choose divine punishment for them. After a rather short fight, the men stood out of breath. A young guy beaten by them lay unconscious not far from the company. Arya thought that the guy could easily win since he was wearing the uniform of a church knight. The girl decided to take a closer look and only now realized her mistake. In fact, this was the standard uniform of the Knights of the Order. The girl wondered when this guy became an apprentice knight. At this time, the bandits reasoned that with such a beaten face, they would not be able to sell the guy at a high price. In the end, Arya admitted that the guy really helped her. Then she formed 2 fingers into a circle and brought them to her lips. A very loud whistle was heard, which stood out especially strongly against the background of the silence of the forest. After this, the robbers suddenly remembered her again and turned their attention to the girl. However, this could no longer help them because a very loud stomp was heard. Literally a moment later, a huge wolf jumped out of the bushes and rushed furiously at the robbers. The Grand Duke told Arya that they fed people to hunting dogs. Therefore, the girl thought that now the wolf would also kill these and closed her eyes so as not to see it. She stood there for a while until she realized something strange. It seemed to the girl that these people had lost their lives, but in fact their screams were only moving away. Therefore, she decided to open her eyes and saw in front of her a wolf who was clutching pieces of someone else's clothing in his teeth. Arya thought it was a good idea to close her eyes because the men were clearly naked as they ran away. She thanked her wolf for saving her and thought that it was time for her to return. However, the girl could not go anywhere, leaving the poor, beaten guy in the middle of the forest alone. Therefore, the girl with difficulty lifted the rather heavy young man and pulled him somewhere. With incredible effort, Arya placed the guy on the back of her wolf. The girl understood that this would slow her down, but she could not leave the guy here in such danger. Therefore, this whole strange trinity went towards the church. After some time, the girl and her wolf with the guy on his back reached the main entrance to the church. There, the girl carefully leaned the boy with his back against the wall, thinking that he would be safe here. Indeed, it was time to return right now. The girl even took out a teleportation scroll and wanted to go home. At the last second, something stopped her. The girl froze in place. The girl lowered her teleportation scroll, then slowly turned to look at the young man behind her. She didn't know if the guy would be so discouraged after what happened today. After all, this child who fought with his conviction to the very end was defeated. And those who sacrifice the lives of others to satisfy their greed won. This is truly an unjust world. If everything seems to be going to ruin, the world will continue to exist, and since we will never know the end, we want to continue. Therefore, the girl first wrote a farewell note to the guy that his path was correct and that he would not decide to abandon him, and only after that she tore up the teleportation scroll and went home. There she found herself right in the middle of the magician Carlin's laboratory and accidentally knocked him down. The young man clearly did not expect such a strange appearance, so he froze in place and could not move. However, then he quickly lost his temper and stood up irritably, saying that the girl and the wolf were late. Since their absence, some inconvenient situations had happened. From somewhere, evidence emerged that the second prince was a palace spy. Arya was not surprised by this event, but she thought that it would happen later. The magician immediately noticed that the girl knew about this because it was this future that she was trying to stop. The magician was surprised that the girl and the second duke were so close, but she denied it. However, the girl still did such a big and dangerous job for Vincent. Either way, Carlin admitted that it was a bad idea to get involved with her, so he asked the girl to leave. It will be difficult to accept a bad reputation if the day of testing comes. Today was the last chance to get an acquittal, so Arya asked her wolf to take her to the Duke. The girl leaned closer to the animal's ear and asked him to teach her to be just as strong. After that, they rushed to the dungeon, where the meeting was taking place at that time. The Grand Duke sat in his place and calmly smoked a cigarette. At this time, his adopted son was chained and stood drooping. After the Grand Duke finished smoking his cigarette and put it out, the trial began. He turned to his adopted son and asked if he had seen the faces of the defendants earlier. Several servants were on their knees, their heads down to the ground, and their hands were tied behind them with ropes. At this time, the Baron could not believe that another criminal was caught right on the street. However, the man believed that he had a chance to win in this matter. The Duke said that if he was not told the truth about the person responsible, he would ban the shipments they had worked so hard on. He was clutching some kind of red stone in his hand, but threw it on the floor as if it meant nothing to him. The guys said that they had been working on this for a very long time, since they were little. Vincent Valentine, this child, crossed the mountains without any weapons in his time. His body was covered with wounds. His clothes were torn by wild animals. The boy was extremely malnourished when he was first discovered in the forest. He confirmed his Valentine bloodline to Grand Duke Valentine and the gods. Not only that, he also proved that he was the genius of the century, so he asked His Majesty to accept him. Therefore, the Grand Duke now looked at his adopted son and could not believe what had happened. The defendants said that they did not know who they initially agreed to work with. They did not know whether the young master was a spy, but they saw him in the feeding den. The Baron already entered into a conversation and confirmed that since they were together in the feeding den, it means they are accomplices. However, the defendants said that they met the young man in the wrong place. The Duke looked thoughtfully at everyone gathered and asked his son if this was true. Vincent had no choice but to confirm these suspicions. However, when asked if he was a spy and that was why he was in the den for feeding, the boy answered in the negative, and the Duke liked the way his son answered the previous question, so he gave him one last chance to answer correctly. He looked at his son, but he could not say anything more to him and only stood silently. Therefore, the Duke had no choice but to order the guards to send the boy to prison. At that moment, he remembered Arya's words that if he lives because he is a genius, he will die for the same reason. He will die at the hands of people who consider him a genius and are therefore afraid of him. Only now, when he was surrounded by guards, did he understand what the girl meant. Tears appeared in the guy's eyes because he couldn't do anything in such a situation. However, at the last moment, someone's quick steps were suddenly heard. Someone's gentle, warm hand quickly grabbed Vincent's wrist and forced him to stop. The boy, with tears in his eyes, leaned on the one who held his hand. It turned out to be the young lady who was just in time and ran to the dungeons. The guy was very happy to see her, but did not understand what she was doing here. The guards also didn't know what to do now, because they couldn't use force against the young mistress. Vincent also didn't understand what a difficult situation they were all in, so he was wondering why the girl had come. In addition to her, the young Duke Lloyd also appeared, who wanted to participate in the interrogation. Arya was grateful to his support, to the fact that the guy did not stand aside. The young master looked at the girl and asked her not to do rash things. After everything, the Duke sat in his place and watched how his children, natural and adopted, held on to each other. He was a little angry at his son for letting her in even though he was ordered back. The Baron supported him, saying that the young Duke or lady had nothing to do with this matter. However, he understood that the young master was worried about his brother, to which the Grand Duke remarked that there are things more important than this. They have gathered here for the sake of something else. His own son agreed, so he took Arya's hand and lifted her up. He showed everyone that the girl was clutching a tree branch in her hand. At first glance, it seemed to everyone that this was an ordinary piece of wood. It did not carry any power. And the two secretaries did not understand what the girl had forgotten here in this place and why she had come. However, the Duke and his servant immediately realized that this was not an ordinary branch, but something special. They immediately recognized this ordinary tree stump as a real divine artifact. The Baron was very surprised that such an ordinary thing turned out to have such great power. He didn't understand how such an ordinary branch could be a divine artifact. The Duke's adopted son looked at everything that was happening with hope in his blue eyes. The boy was a genius, so he immediately guessed what kind of artifact we were talking about. No one had been able to find him before, so he thought that this girl had been chosen by God. After this realization, the girl began to look even more amazing in his eyes than she had before. The Baron also realized that something was wrong here and became agitated, clenching his hand into a fist. He said that he had never heard of God's judgment and clarified what it was. Vincent answered him that when you pray to God, you should not lie to him about anything. Any person will be punished if he lies. This is called God's judgment. Arya was glad that the people gathered here believed in the power of this artifact. The younger Duke said that if the Baron was so curious, he could look at everything with his own eyes. Moreover, now is the time to test the power of the divine artifact in action. He walked up to his brother and placed the tree in his hand, then ordered him to begin. He looked at his relative and asked him if he was a spy. Arya nodded her head, thereby encouraging Vincent to answer the question. The boy began to cry again. He tightly grasped the tree branch in his hands and said that he was not a spy. His brother then asked him if he had ever directly or indirectly harmed their family, to which the blonde also confidently replied that he had never done this. The Grand Duke watched the scene in front of him thoughtfully. He asked why the boy went into that cave and how he ended up there. This question clearly took the blonde by surprise. He didn't want to answer this question, but he had no choice. He said he couldn't say anything about it, but he didn't do any harm to their family. The Grand Duke thought for a moment and silently looked at his adopted son. He then said that this evidence of the boy's innocence was enough for him. The Baron was clearly disappointed with such a quick decision in favor of the young man. He even thought for a second that this was some kind of joke, and they had decided to play a prank on him. The men were terrified because they understood that they would now attack them. The Baron thought it was a coincidence that his son was expelled from the guard and sent to the stables. He did not understand what kind of word this little child asked, what made him stand in his way. The man looked at the bride of the young Duke and did not understand why everyone trusted her so much. She brought the branch here and completely changed everything. It was like a joke of fate. The Baron said that they could not be completely sure that it was a divine artifact, since anyone could find the branch and use a little magic on it to confirm the story. Lloyd decided that he was trying to say that they were all fools who did not know the difference between an ordinary branch and a divine artifact. So the boy walked up to his brother and snatched the branch from his hands. Then he approached the Baron and invited him to try this artifact himself to prove his innocence. The Baron was clearly not happy with this situation, with such disrespect for himself. However, he had to take the branch in his hand and lie about his innocence when he was immediately struck by a blow. Another Baron saw the power of this artifact in action and was horrified that it might be revealed. Therefore, he hastened to admit all this was a misunderstanding, admitted his guilt, and asked to forgive him. However, the Duke asked if this action meant that they accused his son of lacking sincerity and justice. The documents provided by the Baron were one mistake, blaming his child. Tom did not want to give up, and the Baron continued to justify himself as a simple case. He looked at the boy whom he had recently accused of cheating, trying to find support from him. However, Vincent, who had already been completely acquitted, clearly had a different opinion. He looked at the Baron and then said that he regretted that his intelligence was not sufficient to understand his words. Such open mockery on the part of the little boy angered the Baron. There was nothing else to do but disgrace yourself and agree with him. However, the guy continued, because if the Baron insisted so much that he was a spy, then he definitely had a good plan. Therefore, being next to such a stupid person, the boy began to feel as if his own intelligence was falling. This phrase infuriated the Baron because he knew why he was in the feeding den, but could not say. Instead, the man said that they were not related in any way. Then why did the boy continue to blame him? This angered the now young Duke Lloyd, who noticed that the Baron really talked too much. So he came close to the man and gave him a divine artifact. If the Baron is not a traitor, then he could easily prove it with the help of a branch. Suddenly, the young Duke turned around because his bride was pulling his clothes from behind. The girl obviously guessed something and wanted to give a hint to her fiancé. She looked him in the eye and with her lips told him to ask the Baron about manipulating the law. The guy realized that the Baron was free to choose the vocabulary for legislation or to add fake information to manipulate the law. These words made the Baron and the Count's secretary become very nervous. Stuart immediately realized that the girl had guessed, but could not believe that such a child could do it. After all, before this, none of the Great Duke's people understood their terrible plan. The only person who was suspicious was the second young master. That's why they made such a move and framed him, but he didn't understand how this little girl managed to guess. Stuart even thought that the young master might have spilled the beans. However, I remembered the moment when he and the young mistress collided in the corridor. Then the documents scattered all over the floor and the girl could have time to read them, although she had too little time. She didn't even have 30 seconds to do this, but apparently she still managed to do it. Stuart couldn't believe that such a small child managed to open them in a matter of seconds. He looked at the young mistress, who at that moment was about 10 years old. At that second, she seemed to him like something incredible, another genius in this family. Extortion, creation of false institutions, embezzlement, tax evasion, warning against women, the Baron did all this in order to destroy Valentine's family. The young Duke was furious that someone would dare attack his family in such a way. The Baron and Stuart stood silently near the dungeon at that time and did not know what to answer. The Grand Duke watched everything that happened from his throne and considered his further actions. Finally, he stopped remaining silent and asked the Baron if all these accusations were true. Then, without waiting for an answer, he turned to the Count with the same question. However, the criminals did not understand how everything turned out this way, why charges were now being brought against them. The Count was the first to come to his senses and tried to quickly find a way out of this situation for himself. He turned to the Baron and asked if his personal sin was the most serious. The man forcefully poked the divine artifact at Stuart and forced him to pick it up. The man immediately admitted that he only did what the Count ordered him. He promised to promote him to a law enforcement officer for this. Of course, everything, but the divine factor did not work in the hands of more than one of them, which means it was true. While the men stood and cursed among themselves, the children of the Valentine house looked at them and thought that they had dug their own grave. They both must have known from the start that they were breaking the law. At this moment, the sound of metal being pulled out of the scabbard was suddenly heard. The Grand Duke took out his sword and said that right now all the criminals will be executed. Arya immediately experienced the same feelings as when they first met. These irresistible abilities that make the girl think that her existence is just a speck of dust. Lloyd saw the fear on his fiancé's face, then sighed and decided to do something about it. He approached the girl and carefully covered her eyes with his hand so that she would not see the murder. The younger Mr. Vincent also took notice of his brother's action. He followed suit and covered the girl's ears with his hands. After that, there was the sound of a sword swinging and something heavy fell to the floor. After this, the Grand Duke approached the Count and placed the tip of his sword close to his neck. The man knelt before the Grand Duke and begged him for forgiveness. However, he only gave him the right to have the last word before his death. The Baron said that in fact he came here because he knows one secret. The reason why the second young master cannot tell what he did in the feeding den is because he is actually the son of a prostitute. These words made the young master shudder, but the Grand Duke did not even bat an eyelid. He only said that it did not matter to him who the mother of his adopted son was. Arya noticed that Vincent's hands with which he covered her ears were shaking. However, this was not the whole secret that the boy kept. Literally a second later, the Count added that he was also the son of a predator. The lady immediately realized that this was exactly what the boy was trying to hide during the interrogation. That he was the son of a predator is a terrible humiliation, even worse than exile. And the Count continued to say that children of predators themselves become predators. There are no exceptions. Because the worst secrets tend to lie in the darkest corners, not in the light. He continued to talk about how the master had already entered the palace 5 years ago to get the prostitute, his mother, out of the basement, who was prey, who was so unscrupulous that she even married into the imperial family. In fact, the boy's father came from the ancient noble family of Beaufort. Since the family was not satisfied with this, the girl married her nephew, whom the emperor loved most, and also established a relationship with the imperial family. However, after the emperor ascended the throne, the government was brought out of the Cold War. Therefore, rumors immediately began to circulate among the court ladies and husbands. However, the boy, Vincent Valentine, was radically different from the rest. A boy who was adopted because he was distantly related to Valentine. Everyone called him a genius for his truly extraordinary mind. Therefore, now no one understood what this meant for him next. The boy tried to steal his mother, and will try to somehow keep her close to him. The Count continued to shout that just leaving him here would be a huge mistake. Even if he looks good and is smart, there is no guarantee that one day his mother will not be able to brainwash him. After these words, Vincent's hands began to tremble even more than before. Arya noticed that the boy was completely unsettled by this statement. So the young lady wrapped her arms around him as if to calm him down. She let the guy know in this way that everything was okay. He didn't need to tremble. You are you, and none of his family cared at all where he came from. The Grand Duke said the same thing, after which he raised his hand and raised it to strike. Another cutting sound was heard, and another body fell onto the cold floor. The Grand Duke said that he never warns anyone 3 times, after which the man raised his hand to his face and tried to wipe drops of blood from his chin. Only then did the man turn to his children and order them to leave. The trio immediately realized that now was not the best time to be in this place. The guards escorted the young masters and the siren out of the dungeon door, after which they silently bowed to them as if apologizing for the behavior of their master, and left. Lloyd was annoyed that he was called a child and sent away because this is his family's story. The young master thought that he needed to gather his strength and fight his way back. However, then he noticed the girl who was standing next to him. He realized that now it was better for him not to leave her completely alone. Suddenly, all his anger disappeared somewhere from one glance at her. The guy absolutely could not understand why this happened every time he saw a girl. The young master reached into his pocket and began to look for something there. He then pulled out the note the girl had written to him and handed it to her. He said that he did everything exactly as she asked him. The young lady nodded back to him as a sign of gratitude for his help. Sometime later, when all the children had left, the young master was sitting in his room reading a book. He turned page after page, trying to concentrate on the text. However, he heard the door to his room open, and someone slowly entered it. The guy sighed heavily and looked up from the book towards his guest. He had long felt that there was a girl standing outside the door and still couldn't bring himself to enter. The young master slammed the book shut, realizing that he would not be able to read it anytime soon. He also saw no reason why the girl could come to him, to which the young lady simply silently walked closer to her groom's table. She wrote a long message and brought the piece of paper with it to the guy's face. The girl asked if the power of the Grand Duke, which he gave her last time, was still in force. The guy was a little disappointed that she couldn't do anything without using absolute power, but he was interested, so the young master answered yes to this question. He wanted to ask his fiancée what she was going to do with this power, but the girl simply told him to do as she told him. The guy was extremely surprised by such a strange use of great power, but he became very interested in what this funny girl could come up with this time.